So to recap quickly, we're looking at the fear that Balak had, and we're looking at something from the Trisker Magid, his Sefer Mogen Avram. He was a son of the Chernobyl Magid, and it says, Vayar Balak ben Tzipor es kol asher asa Yisrael la'emori. Balak saw everything that Am Yisrael did to the Emori. Vayogar mov mipnei ha'am. And Vayogar is a very powerful lashon of fear. Rav Hirsch explains it's like gerus, meaning it makes you feel like you have no place, like I have no security, I have no home, right? You've made me a stranger and an outsider because I have no stability, I have no security, and that was mipnei ha'am. So, the Rishonim already say that refers to kind of the most basic, lowest level of Jews, right? They refer to the phrase gecholim omamos, which is coals that have cooled down. They're only lightly glowing. There's a little bit of fire in there. That's the Am of Bnei Yisrael. And yet, he was afraid of them. Why? So it had to do with their emori. Emori, even though it's a nation, it's also a lashon of words, of speaking. So this is why he brought Bilam, whose power was also in speaking, to counter them. What did he see? So he saw the power of their Torah and Tefillah. I was just starting to say parenthetically, when we see in Bereshis, Vayihi Adam lenefesh chaya, that man became a living being. So the Onkelos translates the Ruach Mamalala, a speaking spirit. Right? Now, some people explain it very simply. They say that only human beings have the power of words of communication. But that causes people to question, because they watch some National Geographics and they see that the whales have language and the bees have language, and they're all things. And we see the descriptions from Shlomo HaMelech that he knew the language of all the creations that speak. I actually saw a study that says they do find that certain plants communicate with each other as well, right? They have ways to that they see these different things that go, date trees that are next to each other. There's all sorts of stuff. So the answer is that we're not talking just about communication. We're talking about words that transform the world, words that transform you, that transform others, that transform the whole history of the world. A Jewish woman sitting in her house saying a parak of Tehillim changes the world more than any of the famous, powerful people that we know. What they do is an outgrowth of what she did. So he sees this power. Now Yisrael represents the highest level of Am Yisrael. So he sees what those people can do. But what about your plain, regular Jews who were there? He says he saw the Vayogar Moav Mipnei Ha'am. Not just Balak, but his whole nation had this intense fear, like Rav Hirsch said, Vayogar. They felt like they had no security, no anything, because of simple Jews like these Gechalim Omamos. What were they afraid of? So he brings from his father, the Magid of Chernobyl, who said in the name of the Baal Shem Tov, the following scenario. He says, you have a person who's busy all day in his business. Let's say he works in the marketplace. Right? The marketplace, it's very hard to concentrate on anything if the shuk is kind of no longer the way the shuk used to be. But if you remember all these different booths and people yelling and doing and coming. So he says he's so busy in it all day, and he almost forgets that Hashem exists. Now, it's interesting. This quote is brought down in this little sefer that's called the Imras Taharas from the Rachmas Trivka Rebbe, that's out of America, who just passed away a little while ago. And he said, this was said in those days. He says, now, even when a person's sitting at home quietly, we can also forget HaKadosh Baruch Hu, right? You don't have to necessarily, because of the tirda of the workday, right? But then suddenly he looks, he sees the sun's almost down. So he runs off into an alleyway in the corner, and he says, how did I forget? I barely remember that I was a Jew. I forgot this HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I better chaparine, and he mumbles a quick mincha in the alleyway there, even though he doesn't know what he's saying. He says, this is so choshev to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And his tefillah is accepted above. He says, that sigh that he gives, like, I'm so disconnected. I forgot all about it. What happened to me and yet he davens without saying. He says that splits the heavens. This is the fear that they had. Meaning, if a Jew is on a high level, and you're afraid of what the Jew can accomplish on the high level, so you can try to bring the Jew down. But if you see that when the Jew's down, he's still incredibly powerful. So what can you do? What is there to do? So that's why they had that fear. And this is why it describes this strange aspect of Atoye lachachu kahal es kol svivosenu. Kilchoch asher es yerek hasadeh. This kahal, this nation, is going to come and lick us up like an ox licks the grass of the field. So what is that? Rav Hirsch explains this idea of the ox licking is it's a very natural, almost effortless thing. That his tongue is constructed in a way that it grips the grasses and can just rip them out very quickly and easily. Right? Meaning that Am Yisrael have this ability. Now, one of the things that he mentions here is the kahal, right, the nation. That the other power that Am Yisrael has is in their achdus. If they are united, right, that's the famous thing, I'll say in the Gemara, that the door of Achov, even though they were Rishoim, of the Avodah Zarah, because they had achdus, they were successful in their wars. Whereas even in the generation of David HaMelech, because there wasn't achdus, they didn't have as much success in their wars. So the power of achdus is something which is there. It has a tremendous power. It says, therefore, that's why Balak, we found Moab and Midian were enemies trying to make peace in the beginning. They thought also the whole pattern of what Bilam and Balak are doing are trying to mimic Am Yisrael. Trying to mimic, we see they have power in tefillah, we're going to bring somebody who knows how to pray. We see that they have power of achdus, we're going to try to create an achdus. But what's happening is that Am Yisrael are truly connected to Hashem internally and truly connected to each other internally. It's not artificial. It's not something you make happen or that you do. It's a reality that's there. And that's what they weren't able to understand. And that's what they weren't able to do. It's interesting. You find a very unusual word here, right? When he calls to Bilam, he asks him, L'chana ara li es ha'amazeh. Ara li, right, is a lashon of arur, of cursing, but people point out that it's also a particular term in agriculture. What we have is different fruits in the Torah have different verbs for picking them, right? Bitzira, katif, right? The different katsir, right? For them. Now for figs, it's to be oreh. Oreh, that means to detach the figs. Now the verse says that this ara is a lotion of breaking the deep internal connection. Figs, it's interesting, grow differently than other fruit. If you've watched the fig tree in the springtime, right, and it's referred to in Shir Hashirim, Hate'ina chanta pageha. The pag is the little baby fig. Right? For some reason, in Israeli hospitals, they call the preemie ward the pagia, right? The little figs, right? Like little unripe figs. But what you see is that the fig tree, the fruits come out on the branch itself. On the branch itself, even before the leaves or as the leaves are forming. It's not the usual progression where the tree produces leaves, the leaves produce a flower, the flower gets fertilized by the bees and then becomes a fruit. Here, it grows actually on the branch. So ara is a real lashon of severing the fig from its very root, from that which it comes from. That's what they were trying to do, and that's what they wanted to accomplish with Am Yisrael. So here we find that we have this power in tefillah, that even a tefillah where a person doesn't know what he's saying so much has power. Now this is very shocking to us, and it's something that we have to balance out. When I was a kid in school, for some reason, I guess it's kind of disheartening, they had us chant something, and I think it may go back to Avenu Sajigon, where we say, Tefillah b'lo kavana, hike guf b'li neshama. Right? Davening without kavana is like a body without a soul. Basically means if you're not having kavana, your tefillah is dead. Which can be very disheartening when you think about it. So on one hand, we have that. We know that there's supposed to be kavana. And we know lechatchila a person's supposed to have kavanah. But as we saw here already, this image of the Baal Shem Tov, that person that steps away and grabs his tefillah, that it's still something powerful. Now, this was discussed in halacha framework by a great posek who was known as the Kozhiklov Rav, the Eretz Tzvi of Kozhiklov, Rabbi Tzvi Fromer. He was a Talmud of the Avnei Nezer of Sachachov, and he became the Rosh Yeshiva of Yeshivas Chachmei Lublin after Meir Shapira passed away. Meir Shapira passed away, unfortunately, at a very young age. And for the remaining years, until the Nazis came and destroyed the yeshiva, he was the Rosh Yeshiva. And he has Perushim on the Torah, he has famous Shalos and Chulivas Eretz Tzvi. So in that Sefer of Shalos and Chulivas, he addresses the halachic question of how we are able to daven if the basic halacha is that if you didn't have kavanah in that first bracha of Shemon Esrei, it's not davening. How can you keep going on saying Shem Hashem with that? He brings a whole variety of fascinating sources, and he quotes this same Trisker Magid here, and he brings backing for it. So he says, like this. He says that the Sefer HaChinuch, in describing the mitzvah of tefillah, he says the kavanah that we're obligated for this is that a person understands that I'm davening before Hashem. I'm davening to Hashem. And that is what you're supposed to have your focus on. That's a very different type of kavanah already, right? That he says, when the Gemara and the Shulchan Aruch say that a person who didn't have kavanah in Avos in the first bracha has to go back and to daven, he says it could be that this means a person who didn't even have kavanah for that he didn't realize I'm standing before Hashem and davening. And that almost everyone does, right? That virtually everyone does. Even bring la'alacha in terms of the idea of Kriya Shema needing kavanah. I think it was one of the Rishonim who says, if a person came to shul and he sits down and he's davening and he comes to Kriya Shema, so even if he didn't have the explicit kavanah, it's clear that he wants to say Kriya Shema because the Torah commanded us to say Kriya Shema, and what is there? A person who didn't have kavanah, that would be a person that really had no kavanah even for that. This is a person who's doing it robotically, what's called mitzvahs anoshim milumada, that you didn't have anything at all. Okay, but this, a person who does have that kavanah, that's something very powerful. So it's a very dangerous thing to mention. We're afraid sometimes of mentioning things that people can use as an excuse. For example, in the Gemara it says the pasuk v'gisa bo yomam v'layla. We're supposed to learn Torah day and night. Say if you say Kriya Shema Shachris and Kriya Shema Arvis, you're Yotzei. Kriya Shema comes from the Torah. You say Kriya Shema in the morning, you say Kriya Shema at night. You're done. They say, but this halacha is also to say before an Amoritz, right? Because the Amoritz is going to say, great, don't have to go through all that learning and these types of things. So here also perhaps we could be afraid, right? But it is important for a person to know. On one hand, kavanah, the more kavanah a person has with his heart, with his mind, with the understanding, all of that increases things exponentially, right? In fact, another parish, the Tifer Shlomo, it says, Es asher asa Yisrael la'emori, what Am Yisrael do before they daven, that they approach davening with maisim tovim, they approach davening with doing tshuva, right? That's one side of davening that's there. But on the other hand, the person has to know that even if it's not 100% the way it's supposed to be, it's incredibly powerful. It's powerful so much that Balak was afraid of it. And this is something we're supposed to learn and remember, and the Torah tells us, remember the Parsha of Bilam. Remember all these things that happened, because what it tells us is Hashem's love of Am Yisrael. And love, even if it's not perfect. He brings another interesting halacha from the Avnei Nezer. He says, let's say a person only has half a kazayas of matzah on the Leil Seder. That's all you have, half a kazayas. Any point in eating it? In order to fulfill the mitzvah, you have to eat a kazayas. He says yes. He says yes. It doesn't fulfill the mitzvah in terms of all its full requirements, but it's still an active mitzvah. He says, that's why you have to balance it. He says, if you have matzah there and you didn't eat a kazayas, you didn't eat it within the right time, you got to eat again. But if all you have is that half, realize that you did something, right? Don't just say, what's the point? He says the same thing with the tefillah. Even if you feel my tefillah is going to be that one of the man in the alley from the marketplace, even that is value and even that is powerful. And that's what a person has to know. Now, connected to this is another power that they saw. And this is the power that's described here of Lohibit Oven B'Yisrael, Lohibit Oven B'Yakov, right? Hashem Elokov Imo. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't look at the wrongdoings of Am Yisrael. Now, that's a very strange thing, because Chazal say, a person who says, Kol Omer, HaKadosh Baruch Hu Vatranu, HaKadosh Baruch Hu just overlooks things, Yivasru Chayav, that is, life be overlooked, or an interesting other girsa says, Yivasru B'nei Meov, that his intestines be overlooked. I'll just give you an explanation for that, because it's such a strange expression. Rav Chaim Friedlander explains it the following way. He says that the intestines are the longest organ in the human body. They're really quite long. If you would unroll your intestines, they go for quite a while. Now, if I would tell you that tomorrow my grandson has show and tell in school, and it's about science, and it would be really nice if he could bring in a piece of intestine. I have a friend who's a surgeon. If you wouldn't mind, just a quick laparoscopic surgery will hop over to Shari. Tzedek will take out a few inches of intestine that he can bring into school, and it won't leave a scar. You'll go right home. Everybody says, absolutely not. Why? You have so much. Your hands off my kishkas. Nobody, right? Why? He says, because we want to be whole. That's part of a very natural, deep part of a human being. We want to be shalom. If you want to tell, people say God is great. You think God cares about my little cigarette on Shabbos, right? The creator of the whole universe, he can't handle it. The answer is he wants you to be shalom. He wants his world to be shalom. He wants it to be whole. It's not that you insulted him and he's getting revenge on you. He wants that completeness, that wholeness. So that's totally true. But it says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu lo hibit oven b'Yisrael. So the Maharal and others explain that chet, sin, is never a true integral part of a Jew. Chazal say, a person only sins when he has a certain period of temporary insanity. Okay, so therefore, right, even the Jew, even if a Jew does it b'mezid, right, even if he does so, nonetheless, right, that's not a true aspect of who he is. Now, the Sfas Emes brings down fascinating midrashim that both Balak and Bilam were aware of sins that Am Yisrael would do in the future. Right? It says that Bilam was a prophet, right? He had this and he was able to see. And in fact, they talk about,
How did Balak know that?
So Balak also, they say, was also a person of great negative spiritual power. He was, he needed Bilam for certain specialties, but he also, and when they went, they were trying to target different things that Am Yisrael would do in the future. Like he brought him up to a place called Bamos Habal. Right? Now, this is because Am Yisrael in the future would be worshiping the Baal. So they felt that this was very clear ammunition they could use against Am Yisrael. Right? Even if now they're okay, look at what's going to be happening to them. And Bilam's power to curse was based on his understanding what people would do. But he brings down here from many sources, both the Maharal and others, the Zohar Kodesh, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't look, right? The word hibit means to look from a distance, right? Lo hibit oven b'Yakov, HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't look at the averas in the future of Am Yisrael. He will look at the mitzvahs that they'll do in the future, but not at the averas. Why? Why is that balanced? Why is that fair? Because, as we said, when a Jew does an avera, that's not really an expression of who he is. That's an expression of him forgetting who he is. When a Jew does a mitzvah, that is truly an expression of who he is, right? It's an expression of his true inner self. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not looking at the fact that the Jews will worship the Baal then. That has nothing to do with who they are. Hashem Elokov Imo, it says. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is with them, and I'll never leave them. Anochi Hashem Elokecha, when at Har Sinai, that first commandment is very strange. Anochi Hashem Elokecha. It doesn't seem to give us any action point, right? I am Hashem your God. So the next one, Lo Yelech Elohim Acharim Al Panai, you should not have false God. But what is this one doing? So the Chovos HaLevavos brings down that is the root of Emunah, the mitzvah of Emunah and Bitachon. But the Sfas Emes says also what it did is it created a reality, right? It created a reality. Am Yisrael lived through that, hearing it directly from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and it created the reality that from then on forever, Hashem is always part of a Jew, and a Jew is always part of Hashem. That's always there. And this makes so little sense, even to people as knowledgeable as Balak and Bilam, but it's not based on sense, right? Truas melech bo, that word trua, right? They talk about it a lot on Rosh Hashanah, obviously, is from a lashon of re'us. Re'us means love and friendship. The love of the king is with him. If it's just the king and his subjects, so the subjects don't behave, you can get rid of them. Truas melech bo means inside of them. That relationship is inside of every Jew. HaKadosh Baruch Hu's being the God of every Jew is always there. And in fact, the Beis HaLevi says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu did us this great gift that he said, I will only be present in the world through Am Yisrael. Nobody else can bring my presence into the world. They can learn Jewish books, they can do all the things, but I will only be here through Am Yisrael because I am in them and they're part of me. So that's why this Parsha is one that Chazal wanted us to remember so much. There was even, it says in the Gemara Brachos that there was a thought to include this in Kriya Shema, right? Along with the proclaim of Kriya Shema, to read this Parsha of Bilam. And they said it would just be too much for people, right? We already know. So part of it is this tremendous expression of the love that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has for Am Yisrael. Am Yisrael, even at their lower level, right? Certainly the power that we have. And this idea of number one, the tefillah, any tefillah b'asher hu sham, what you're able to do to realize you've done something powerful and that you've changed things. The story I heard, just to illustrate, there was a great Rebbe who passed away, maybe like 20 years ago. The Ribnitzer Rebbe, his name was. He was one of the last Rebbes in the Soviet Union, and eventually came out. He was in Israel. He ended up in America. He was in this gated Seagate, right, by the ocean there. And he had different anhugas. He had a very special minyan, davened relatively late, and he only wanted like 10 people in that minyan, chosen people each day. And obviously you could not have davened beforehand. So one day they were assembling that minyan, and a man came to participate, and the gabbai was double checking. You didn't daven yet? No, didn't daven yet. And the man walks in, and the Rebbe says, but you davened already. And the gabbai gets so angry with him. He says, how dare you? I asked you if you davened. You said you didn't daven. And the Rebbe saw that you did. You davened, right? He says, you lied? You lied? You're trying. The Rebbe would have 10 people davening with him. And the man was like smiling, and he's so happy. He said, what are you grinning about? He said, I never imagined that my davening did anything. And here the Rebbe took one look at me, and he saw that I davened. He must do something, right? And that's what's important to remember, right? That's the key. Bilam had tremendous powers, but his powers can't conquer even the idea of the Am, the most basic level of Am Yisrael. Us, in our most out of it sense and state, still have that tremendous power. Okay, and that's something to have to remember at all times. Do we have a minyan here? No.
The Amori.
Yeah.
This is the fear that they had of Klal Yisrael because of the power of their
Amira.
words. But how does the Amori connect with Klal Yisrael?
Because
story.
Asher Asa Yisrael la Emori, what Am Yisrael did to the Emori, yes. But there is a way of darshaning it, yeah, which is there. Let's say it. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Continue.